Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share with you various stories about love and betrayal from around the world. Now, let's begin today's story journey. Under a sky heavy with dark clouds, in a private cemetery on the outskirts of Montreal, Canada, dozens of black umbrellas rested like a flock of ravens on the green lawn. Garrett stood before the gravestone, staring at the marble monument carved with the name Desmond, his emotions complex. As the founder of North Star Resources, Desmond had held significant influence in the mining industry, and his sudden passing sent shockwaves throughout the entire sector. For the past 2 months, Desmond's health had steadily deteriorated. Doctors diagnosed his worsening heart condition, but the stubborn old man refused to reduce his workload. Garrett had suggested multiple times that his father-in-law slow down, but Desmond always shook his head. There's still too much to do, too much to protect. Garrett felt a hand gently rest on his shoulder and turned to see his wife Fiona standing expressionless behind him. She wore black mourning attire with immaculate makeup, yet her eyes held not a single tear. The coldness and distance in their marriage had persisted for so long that Garrett had grown accustomed to it. The funeral is over. We should head back to the company. The board is waiting. Fiona's voice was cold and calm. Garrett nodded, taking one last look at his father-in-law's gravestone. 6 years ago, it was Desmond's keen eye that had recruited him, then an obscure geologist, into North Star. In just a few short years, Garrett led exploration teams to discover 3 invaluable mineral deposits for the company, propelling North Star from a mid-sized mining operation into an industry giant. Upon returning to the company building, all eyes turned to Garrett as he entered the conference room. The board members displayed various expressions, some sorrowful, some anxious, but most revealing uncertainty about the future. Garrett noticed a hint of tension in everyone's face, as if they were all waiting for some important announcement. Fiona walked straight to the head chair, once Desmond's position. Her demeanor carried a sophistication and composure beyond her years, with an innate sense of superiority that Garrett could never comprehend. Throughout their 5-year marriage, he had countless times attempted to reach this seemingly solid, yet fragile soul, always separated by an invisible barrier. Everyone, thank you for attending my father's funeral. Fiona surveyed the room, her voice steady. According to my father's will and company bylaws, as his sole heir, I will assume the position of North Star's president. From today forward, the company will continue under my leadership. A profound silence fell over the conference room. Garrett noticed an unfamiliar man sitting in the corner, impeccably dressed with piercing eyes. Following Garrett's gaze, Fiona introduced him. This is Mr. Nathaniel, CEO of Northern Equipment Group, who will become our important partner in the future. Nathaniel smiled and nodded to everyone, his gaze lingering on Garrett with an evaluative quality. Nathaniel was no ordinary supplier. In the industry, he was known as the Equipment King, also famous for his aggressive business tactics. His company provided equipment to several mining giants, expensive but quality guaranteed. After the meeting, Garrett stood alone on the company building's observation deck, overlooking Montreal's cityscape. 5 years ago, he and Fiona had held their wedding here, with Desmond laughing and patting his shoulders saying, "Son, you're not just my son-in-law, but my most capable assistant. The future of North Star will be protected by both of you." Back then, Fiona was still the girl who admired him, not the stranger who had grown increasingly cold toward him. When had the marriage begun to crack? Perhaps 2 years ago, when Garrett led his team to discover the 3rd mineral deposit and received an industry award. As the head of human resources and administration, Fiona should have been proud of her husband, but Garrett saw jealousy in her eyes instead. "It's your achievement again. Father only has eyes for you," Fiona had said then, her tone unexpectedly bitter. Garrett was not a workaholic. He strived to balance work and family, setting aside time each week for dinner with Fiona and regularly planning short trips. But Fiona seemed increasingly indifferent to these efforts, beginning to travel frequently for business, attending various social events, and returning home later and later. For months ago, Garrett discovered irregularities in the company's financial statements. Drilling equipment from Northern Equipment Group was priced far above market rates, yet the company accepted them without question. As technical director, Garrett raised concerns, only to have them dismissed by Fiona as administrative decisions. This is my area of responsibility. You just focus on your geological exploration. Fiona had responded harshly. Instinct told Garrett something wasn't right. He began investigating secretly and discovered that Fiona's contact with Nathaniel far exceeded normal business interactions. Initially, he thought this was just Fiona's way of expanding business relationships, until that night, when everything became clear. It was a Thursday when Garrett, after attending an industry seminar, planned to surprise Fiona by taking her to the restaurant they frequented during their courtship. However, upon entering the restaurant, he saw his wife with Nathaniel sitting in a corner booth, engaged in intimate conversation. Fiona laughed freely. Nathaniel's hand rested on her waist, and their exchanged glances during a toast spoke of unspoken secrets. In that moment, Garrett felt an icy chill. He didn't confront them, instead calmly leaving the restaurant. Garrett had always considered himself a rational person, and even when emotionally wounded, he chose the most logical approach: collect evidence, understand the truth, then decide how to act. In the following days, Garrett systematically gathered evidence: abnormally high-priced equipment purchase contracts, unreasonable budget increases approved by Fiona, exclusive supply agreements granted to Nathaniel's company without competitive bidding. He also noticed that after each major contract signing, Fiona's personal account received large, unexplained deposits. Meanwhile, Garrett observed Desmond's health rapidly deteriorating, especially after he hinted to his father-in-law about possible company problems. Desmond seemed to have sensed something. He began meeting frequently with lawyers, modifying documents, sometimes telling Garrett meaningfully, "I trust you'll make the right choice." Garrett reported his findings to Desmond, who was furious and promised to handle the situation. However, the day before Desmond planned to take action, he suffered a fatal heart attack, leaving behind unfinished plans and a company with its power misplaced. Desmond's sudden death hit like a heavy blow, but greater upheaval was yet to come. 3 days after the funeral, Garrett entered his office to find a letter on his desk. Opening it, he discovered a formal termination notice bearing Fiona's signature as the new president. Garrett took the letter to Fiona's office. She was sitting with Nathaniel, the two looking intimate and relaxed, as if they had just finished discussing some important decision. "What does this mean?" Garrett placed the letter on the desk, struggling to maintain his composure. Fiona raised her chin, victory gleaming in her eyes. "Exactly what it says. You're fired. The company no longer requires your services." "Because I discovered your secret?" Garrett asked calmly. Fiona laughed, a laugh that seemed foreign to Garrett. "Because I'm in charge now. Get out." Nathaniel remained expressionless beside her, his eyes flashing with calculation. He exchanged a glance with Fiona, seemingly suggesting some understanding between them. Garrett realized these two had been preparing for this moment for a long time. His departure was just part of their plan. Looking at this completely changed woman before him, the last trace of attachment in Garrett's heart vanished. He took a deep breath and said, "Fine by me." This response clearly caught Fiona off guard, furrowing her brow. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Goodbye, Fiona." Garrett turned and left without another word. Fiona and Nathaniel exchanged puzzled looks, obviously not expecting Garrett to accept the decision so calmly. In their imagination, Garrett should have been angry, protesting, even threatening. But he wasn't, and this calmness actually made Fiona feel uneasy. "He surrendered too easily," Fiona said to Nathaniel. "That's not like him," Nathaniel reassured her. "Perhaps he finally understands his situation. Don't worry, with this position, you can completely control the company, and our plan will proceed smoothly." Fiona nodded, but the doubt in her eyes hadn't fully dissipated. She didn't know what Garrett's calm demeanor concealed. Back home, Garrett began packing his personal belongings. Although they had purchased the mansion after marriage, the property title was in Fiona's name. He knew he couldn't stay long. As Garrett was organizing documents, an email caught his attention. The sender was Desmond's personal lawyer, and the recipients included both him and Fiona. The subject line was straightforward: "Notice of execution regarding Mr. Desmond's residual debt agreement." Garrett opened the email and carefully read its contents. With each line, his breathing quickened. The email detailed that Desmond had established a complex debt agreement in his lifetime. Garrett's so-called dry shares were actually a type of convertible bond against North Star, totaling 70% of the company's valuation. These bonds would automatically mature under two conditions: Desmond's death or Garrett's dismissal from the company. Once triggered, Garrett had the right to demand immediate cash repayment of all principal and accumulated interest or convert the bonds into over 50% of common stock at an agreed price. The email concluded by asking for Garrett's choice. Now Garrett understood Desmond's meaningful words and frequent meetings with lawyers. The old man had foreseen this day and prepared an insurance policy for his son-in-law, ensuring that even in the worst scenario, neither Garrett nor the company would be devoured by Fiona and Nathaniel's ambitions. Garrett's phone suddenly rang. It was Fiona calling. He pressed answer, and Fiona's trembling voice came through. "This can't be possible. Did you know about this?" "I know now," Garrett replied calmly. "Father couldn't have done this to me." Fiona's voice carried desperation. "This must be fake. The lawyer has confirmed the document's authenticity," Garrett said. "Seems your father had greater foresight than we imagined." Silence fell on the other end for a moment before Fiona's voice turned pleading. "Garrett, we can talk about this. This concerns the company's future after all." "Yes, we will talk." Garrett's voice was calm yet firm. "Tomorrow morning at 10, company conference room. Bring all the directors." After hanging up, Garrett replied to the lawyer's email, stating his choice. He would convert the bonds into equity, becoming North Star's controlling shareholder. That night, Garrett checked into a hotel downtown. He needed to think and plan, preparing for tomorrow's meeting. This wasn't just about personal grievances, but concerned the company's future. Despite the pain of Fiona's betrayal, he wouldn't let personal emotions affect the company's operations and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. The next morning, as Garrett walked through North Star's doors, he sensed the unusual stares from employees. News had apparently spread, with people discussing the company's sudden changes in whispers and murmurs. Garrett entered the conference room where Fiona and the directors were already seated. Nathaniel was also present, sitting beside Fiona with a grave expression. Garrett noticed the red streaks in Fiona's eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept all night. Desmond's lawyer stood by the projector, ready to explain the debt agreement in detail. When the meeting began, the lawyer presented all legal documents, confirming that Garrett now held 53% of North Star's shares, becoming the company's largest shareholder and actual controller. "This isn't fair." Fiona suddenly stood up, her voice shaking. "This was my father's company. I am his only heir." The lawyer responded calmly. "Mr. Desmond made thorough legal arrangements during his lifetime. These documents are all notarized and completely legally valid. He did leave you some shares and property, but the control of the company, he chose Mr. Garrett for that." Fiona collapsed into her chair, her face pale. Nathaniel reached out to comfort her, but was pushed away. Calculation flashed in his eyes as he clearly reassessed the situation. Garrett stood, looking around the conference room. "As North Star's new controlling shareholder, I announced the following decisions. First, Fiona is relieved of her presidential duties, with the vice president temporarily taking over. Second, all contracts with Northern Equipment Group are immediately terminated, and all procurement decisions from the past 2 years will be thoroughly reviewed. Third, the company's finances will undergo a comprehensive audit." Nathaniel abruptly stood up. "You can't do this. We have prior contracts." Garrett turned to Nathaniel, his gaze cold. "All contracts will undergo legal review. If any improprieties are found, the company reserves the right to pursue accountability." Nathaniel's expression darkened, but he quickly regained composure. "I understand. I'm sure we can find a solution." After the meeting, Garrett headed toward his office when Fiona caught up to him. Her makeup had smudged somewhat, but her eyes no longer held pleading. Instead, they showed anger and reluctance. "You think you've won?" Fiona said softly, her voice carrying a threat. "I won't give up like this." Garrett stopped, turning to face her. "What cards do you have left to play?" "Fiona, the game is over. I've contacted a lawyer. Divorce papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. As for company matters, I suggest you find a good lawyer. The audit has already begun." Fiona's face paled. "You won't find any evidence." "Really?" Garrett asked calmly. "Then why was Desmond so outraged when he found out? He may not have had time to reveal the truth, but the arrangements he left behind say everything." Fiona fell silent, fear flashing in her eyes. Garrett continued. "Let me give you some advice. Cooperate with the investigation and perhaps the consequences will be lighter. After all, Desmond might prefer to see his daughter repent rather than spend the rest of her life in prison. Are you threatening me? Fiona's voice trembled. No, I'm just stating facts. Garrett's tone remained calm and firm. We have nothing more to say, Fiona. Garrett walked into his new office, formerly Desmond's place. He didn't rush to change any decorations, simply organizing the workspace. In the coming days, Garrett needed to examine every corner of the company to understand the extent of damage Fiona and Nathaniel had caused. Meanwhile, Nathaniel hadn't admitted defeat. He tried to contact Garrett through various channels, proposing so-called win-win solutions, maintaining cooperation while promising more favorable prices. However, Garrett ignored these proposals, having seen Nathaniel's true nature, a businessman who exploited relationships for improper gains. News spread like wildfire through Canada's mining circles. North Star had undergone a dramatic change, with the founder's daughter Fiona dismissed and the presidential position she had held for less than a week vanishing. Even more shocking was that company control fell to Chief Geologist Garrett, while all cooperation with Northern Equipment Group was urgently halted. Industry insiders speculated about the truth behind these events, with various rumors spreading like viruses. Some said Garrett was Desmond's true successor. Others suggested improper relations between Fiona and Nathaniel, while some hinted at possible financial fraud. Regardless of the truth, North Star's stock price, after a brief decline, began steadily rising, indicating market confidence in Garrett's takeover. Garrett sat in what was once Desmond's office, reviewing the preliminary report submitted by the financial audit team. The numbers told the story. Over the past 18 months, North Star had overpaid nearly 20 million Canadian dollars in equipment fees through cooperation with Northern Equipment Group. Where did this money go? The report provided a chilling answer. Part flowed into offshore accounts set up in the Cayman Islands, with Fiona and Nathaniel as the beneficiaries. Garrett put down the report and rubbed his temples. 6 years of effort, focus, and dedication, exchanged for his wife's betrayal and deception. He recalled meeting Fiona, then an assistant in the company's administrative department, full of energy, respecting her father's business. When had her mindset changed? About 3 years ago, Fiona began showing obvious dissatisfaction with Garrett's professional achievements. Desmond always praised Garrett's contributions in company meetings, viewing him as North Star's future. Although Garrett never dwelled on this, he loved his work but never obsessed over power games. Fiona seemed to view it as dismissive toward herself. I am Desmond's biological daughter, Fiona had shouted during one argument. Yet he credits all the company's achievements to you. Garrett hadn't paid much attention to these words then, thinking it was just emotional venting. Fiona clearly harbored greater ambitions for the company, but Garrett thought this reasonable. After all, it was her father's life's work. He actively supported his wife's career development, encouraged her participation in important decisions, and even willingly shared credit for some projects with her. However, Fiona seemed unsatisfied with these gestures. As time passed, her contact with Nathaniel became increasingly frequent. Initially, Garrett suspected nothing. Nathaniel's company was North Star's main equipment supplier, making business interactions inevitable. Not until that day did Garrett accidentally discover their ambiguous relationship. Garrett's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. The lawyer entered, holding a stack of documents. The divorce papers are ready, the lawyer said. Based on the evidence you've provided, the court will likely support your request regarding property division. Garrett nodded. Thank you. Please ensure Fiona understands I won't accept any mediation or settlement. After the lawyer left, Garrett turned his attention to the company restructuring plan. He needed to stabilize employee morale, rebuild customer confidence, and handle the legal dispute with Nathaniel. This wouldn't be an easy path, but he was prepared. Meanwhile, Fiona wasn't sitting idle. She hired a top legal team, attempting to challenge the legality of Desmond's debt agreement. She claimed ignorance, portraying herself as a victim manipulated by Nathaniel. However, as the audit deepened, more evidence surfaced proving she was an active participant, perhaps even the mastermind. Nathaniel's situation was more difficult. After losing North Star as a major client, his company's stock plummeted, and other clients began reevaluating their cooperation with him. Worse still, North Star submitted evidence to regulatory authorities of his alleged commercial bribery, triggering an official investigation. A month later, Canadian business regulators formally launched an investigation into Nathaniel and Fiona. Media reported this news, describing it as one of the most serious business fraud cases in Canada's mining industry in recent years. Shareholder support for Garrett reached unprecedented heights, with the board unanimously approving his proposed restructuring plan. North Star began rejuvenating. Garrett introduced a new management team, reformed the procurement process, and increased exploration investments. The company's stock price rose by 25% in just 3 months, with market value reaching an all-time high. Industry analysts praised this as textbook-level corporate crisis management. In stark contrast to the company's recovery was Fiona and Nathaniel's situation. As the investigation deepened, cracks appeared in their relationship. Nathaniel began shifting blame, claiming he merely acted according to Fiona's requests. Fiona accused Nathaniel of being the mastermind who induced her to violate business ethics. In court, prosecutors presented their communication records, proving they had been conspiring since 3 years ago, using their positions for personal gain. More humiliating for Fiona was evidence showing Nathaniel maintained similar relationships with multiple women, with Fiona being just one of them, not the only one he claimed. When this evidence became public, Fiona finally realized she had been used. Nathaniel had deceived her not only in business, but emotionally as well. She had thought she found someone who truly appreciated and needed her, but in reality, Nathaniel merely saw her as the key to Desmond's empire. For Garrett, these revelations brought no satisfaction. He had completely sealed away past emotions, focusing on the company's future. The divorce case quickly reached its final judgment. Fiona received her premarital assets and some joint property, but far less than she had hoped. 6 months later, the official investigation concluded. Nathaniel was charged with commercial bribery and fraud, facing up to 10 years imprisonment and hefty fines. Shocking the industry, investigators discovered Nathaniel had similar patterns of behavior with several other mining companies. North Star was just one of them. Fiona's situation was slightly better. In exchange for cooperating with the investigation, she received a lighter sentence: 2 years probation, community service, and substantial fines. But she lost her reputation and standing in the mining industry, forced to leave Montreal where she had lived her entire life, relocating to Vancouver on the West Coast to start anew. As the dust settled, Garrett had to face an unexpected fact. Despite justice being served, an emptiness in his heart remained unfilled. The breakdown of marriage, the betrayal of trust, these wounds would take time to heal. A year later, on a weekend, Garrett drove alone to Desmond's cemetery. Since that funeral, he hadn't returned. Standing before his father-in-law's gravestone, Garrett felt profound emotions. "You saw through everything, didn't you?" Garrett softly said to the gravestone. "You protected the company, and in your way, you protected me too." A gentle breeze swept through, leaving the cemetery peaceful. Garrett placed a bouquet of flowers and contemplated for a long while. This past year, he had devoted all his energy to rebuilding the company, leaving almost no personal life. Colleagues and friends urged him to start anew, but Garrett knew he still needed time. Leaving the cemetery, Garrett's phone rang with an urgent call from the company. In the new exploration area northwest of Montreal, the team found signs suggesting a potentially enormous copper vein. This was another major breakthrough since the previous discovery. Garrett turned his car toward the company. Life always pushes forward, not stagnating for anyone's pain. After experiencing betrayal and loss, Garrett found motivation to move on, building upon Desmond's legacy and realizing his own value. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Vancouver, Fiona was watching North Star's press conference. On television, Garrett confidently answered reporters' questions, announcing the company's new discoveries and future plans. Fiona turned off the TV and walked to the window. The former mansion, dignity, and status were gone, leaving only regret and lessons. She picked up a job application on the table, her 4th attempt to apply for an administrative assistant position at a local small resource company. Falling from the pinnacle to rock bottom, Fiona understood a truth in this harsh reality. Ambition itself isn't wrong, but choosing how to achieve it is crucial. Across the ocean in a country without an extradition treaty, Nathaniel faced his own predicament. His business empire collapsed after the scandal broke, assets frozen, reputation destroyed. Once sitting on the throne of Equipment King, he now barely maintained his life in a foreign land with the small portion of funds he had transferred in advance. Back in Montreal, Garrett stood on North Star's top floor, overlooking the city where he had deeply rooted himself. Stars dotted the sky like countless possibilities twinkling. He knew that after the shadow of betrayal waited new opportunities and challenges. Desmond left behind not just a company, but a responsibility and mission. Garrett picked up a cooperation proposal from the world's largest mining group on his desk, a goal Desmond had hoped for but never achieved during his lifetime. Now, Garrett would continue this unfinished business, leading North Star toward a broader future. The elevator doors opened, and the exploration team leader walked into the office with the latest survey data in hand. A new day had begun, and life continued. After all the betrayal and pain, the best response wasn't resentment but success. The strongest proof wasn't explanation but achievement. Garrett turned toward the window. New mining areas awaited his development. New opportunities awaited his grasp. This is life. Even after experiencing the deepest betrayal, one must have the courage to move forward. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more wonderful content. Looking forward to seeing you in our next story.